Thanks for coming in this afternoon to our lunchtime talk. My name is Luke. I'm the studio producer here at the Pervasive Media Studio. Who hasn't been to this place before? Great, cool, welcome. So, for your benefit, the PM Studio is a space where people and artists and creatives can take risks at early stages with ideas that sit around the field of creative technology. We make space for people with desks, meeting rooms, and event space, but also a bigger network of 450 residents who are spread out all over the world. I can talk to people more about Studio after the talk, so come and see me if you'd like to find out more about what we do, or if you've got an idea that you'd like to talk to us about. After the talk is finished, you're welcome to stick around the top desk from 2 till 5. Come and see me or Joe Kimber, who's at the back, just over there, moving around in the green top, and we can find you a space to work. It's a great way to learn how this space ticks and meet some of the other people that work here as well. Normally, I would do the next bit of the intro, but today's lunchtime talk is a little bit of an unusual one, and I'm going to hand over to Sarah Pickthall, who's going to introduce the next stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to see so many people here, many new people to Pervasive Media Studio. Welcome to this lunchtime talk. It's a talk with a difference because we are live streaming it and we're using sign language interpretation and captioning. So we have a live audience, and some of the live audience are wearing some of the technology that is connected to the work of our focused artist, Chisato Minamimura. I am Chisato's producer and have been working with her for 3 years on an extraordinary journey. And some of that journey started here in Bristol with supportive conversations and connecting with digital providers to make her new work Scored in Silence. For anyone who wants to follow this, the hashtag is #ScoredInSilence, 2 capital S's. This lunchtime talk is being brought to you in association with Disability Arts Online. So if you want to go to their Facebook page, there's a pinned post there where people who are watching online can get involved, ask questions about what they're hearing through the presentation. So a quick summary. When I've finished burbling on, we'll bring Chisato up to talk through her work and the digital she's using to create real risks and innovation for accessibility and making artwork of her latest show. And then we are going to show an 8-minute extract from Scored in Silence, a sign mime, through which some of our audience members will be experiencing vibration of part of the experience. So we really hope to get your feedback as part of the lunchtime talk. People at home, you won't be able to access this, but you will hear the sound composition. And different access streams of the extract will be available, an audio description which is already up there. And again, if all of the access fails online, never mind, there will be a summative YouTube video of this whole lunchtime talk. After we've done the screening, there will be a Q&A. And what Chisato and team would like people, if they are deaf, to come up, or if they are hearing, to come up and pose their question live. If that's not your thing, there are some post-it notes for you to put your questions down on the post-it note, and I will get them. But in the first instance, we'll be hearing from people online and then from you in the room. So, if everybody's clear and everybody's happy and connected at home, fingers crossed, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Chisato Minamimura. Thank you.
Good, thank you everyone. Hello, my name is Chisato Minamimura. And my sign name is Chisato. I have been working on a project that I am going to show you now. It's called Scored in Silence, as you can see on the screen. Now what happened was, I based my work on experiences of the end of the Second World War when the Americans bombed Japan. And for deaf people there who experienced the blast and the fallout, they told me their stories and I incorporated them into this performance. So, how did I go about doing this? You will see the image on the screen. This is me, myself, a deaf artist. and there are three hands, two large hands above me, as if projecting the image of oppression and the experience of deaf people at that time. So, in Japan, every summer, there is a special event where deaf people remember their experiences, generally, of what happened in 1945. And there's an awful lot of publicity on television and in the news, which means that people who hear know that this memorial is occurring every year. Now, 3 years ago, I met some deaf survivors of the bombing, and when they told me their stories, I realised that hearing people's stories and deaf people's experiences were very different. So, for example, deaf people who lived through the atomic bomb, what they saw was the explosion, but to them it looked beautiful. And that was the perspective of deaf people at the time. And when they told me this, it struck me that I could apply to the Arts Council, the International Development Fund. I could apply for some money to help me to fly to Japan and gather more of these stories and experiences from deaf people. If you see the image on the screen here, this is of me interviewing an older deaf lady about her experiences of living through the bombs. And she was about 80 years old, and it struck me that this was actually a crucial, critical time for me to gather these stories of this generation of deaf Japanese people. So what I had to do then was consider how I would take these narratives and turn them into an artwork. And what I wanted to do was really show you the art form and how I worked to create this performance. I worked as a choreographer, and this image shows 3 of my professional dancers working on creating a visual score. These professional dancers here took the movements that we worked on in the choreography in order to create a visual score. In addition to this, we looked at notions of movement and how these stories could be translated more visually. So I decided to add in some other elements in order to create the performance. I have previous experience of working as a BSL guide in various galleries and museums, such as the British Museum and the Tate in London. This image shows me working at the Photographer's Gallery in London, and I thought I could actually incorporate some of this work into the performance. But what about other deaf elements that I could incorporate into the performance? Obviously, there is BSL, British Sign Language, there is sign mime as a form, and I wanted to make sure that all of this was incorporated and brought together into a coherent piece of work. But there was something else missing that I wanted to try and explore. And this is the digital technology world that I could dip into and think about how deaf people could experience through their senses a visual performance. And if you think about the 5 senses that human beings have, we have the sense of hearing, we have sight, taste, smell and touch, and we have a whole spectrum of senses. But for deaf people, the sense of hearing is missing. So what I needed to do was think about how digital technology could be incorporated to compensate. But not everybody is the same, of course. So, for example, some people are very strongly visual, or they have very strong engagement through their sense of smell. Everybody is different. So what I decided through the use of digital technology was to try and create an impactful piece of work that either delivered or compensated for the range of senses that we all have. In terms of the visuality, what I decided was that in my team, there was somebody in particular called John Armstrong, John, this is his sign name here, and he is the lighting producer and artistic designer. And we talked about the idea of incorporating something called a Holo-Gauze. If you see, this is what's being shown on the screen. This was 2 years ago as part of our research and development work. So let me tell you a little bit about how this works. We have this large screen, a normal screen as it were, which is behind me, and then I am standing in front of that, and in front of me there is the Holo-Gauze, which can be projected on, and it means the audience can see either just the gauze, or they can see just me, or they can see me with the projected image overlaid. So we have the sort of a 3-in-1, if you like, that everybody can see. This image is another example of the Holo-Gauze in action. But then I thought, I wonder if there's any more technology I can bring into this. So this is called the Woojer strap. So when there is music or sound overlaid into the performance, I wondered if there was another form of technology that could provide a translation from one sense to the other. Now there are some people here in the audience today who are wearing Woojer straps. And so in terms of scored in silence, the whole performance is 50 minutes long. Unfortunately, we don't have time to show you the whole performance, so we have taken an 8-minute extract which has the sign mime element incorporated into your experience today, and that's what we will be showing you now. But first, I just want to explain to you that there is no voiceover because sign mime doesn't need any translation into words. It's just for you to sit back and enjoy through your eyes and through your ears and through your sense of touch. But in terms of the live performance, the live stream audience, sorry, you won't be, obviously you don't have the experience of the Woojer belt, but you will have the audio description, which is not available here to the live audience in the room.
I've been told this table might shatter, so I'm just going to... Thank you very much, Chisato. As ever, we're bringing John Armstrong into the conversation now. John is responsible for the lighting design and working with the Holo-Gauze, so the projection as part of Scored in Silence. We've asked people, obviously, who are watching it on the live stream to send us some questions. Maybe you have questions in the room. We're really interested to see what our Woojer wearing audience are feeling in terms of the experience as a whole. Chisato's ambition is obviously from a deaf perspective, but to document really important untold histories, but from the kinesthesia that we create, something different, a different sort of art form, let alone the potential for vibration to be something that all audiences can play with and connect with and access. So over to you, really. Questions for John, for Chisato. What we would like to happen, either feed the questions through post-its, or please do come and stand up and give your question live if you feel that's what you would like to do. That's great for the online audience and great to connect and be part of what deaf people would stand up and present and ask a question. Maybe first to ask if there are any questions that are coming through online. I will repeat the question if it's not clear, just to make sure that everyone can connect and hear.
Yeah, so I think it'd be really interesting to hear what John's involvement in the process has been. I've seen the show live and the lighting is absolutely gorgeous. Almost comes across on that film, but not quite as atmospheric as in the actual room. We've got a question online also, so if you could talk a bit about that, and then also how did Chisato work on the animation to come up with the content, and Chisato, did you have really clear ideas of the design already, or was it influenced by conversations?
So, question from Trish, that was her own experience of seeing the work in Edinburgh, but also the background on the animation. How did Chisato come up with the animation? How did that influence it? Was it in her head already? How did that come about? So maybe to you, John, first.
Sure. So yeah, my name's John Armstrong. It's really nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us here and online. As the guy said, I'm a lighting designer. I have a hand in the kind of design and sort of systems of the projection as well. And I lead a slightly strange double life that I'm also a professional magician. So what I really wanted to do with this project is kind of introduce the illusory aspects of light in a kind of effort to describe something which is fundamentally indescribable. So the kind of horror of the bombs being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We can't possibly imagine what it was like as an experience, and as a hearing person I can't imagine what it was like for a deaf person to experience that. So this shows, I think people have been kind of talking about a bit already, it's all about patching together experiences via different sensory input, via different kind of fragments and different methods of storytelling. So my part in this was to think about how we can use light as a conversation with space, as a conversation with history, what moments were going to be kind of bathed in a sort of realistic moonlight key, and which bits need to be a bit more kind of abstract and frightening, and sort of just set in place some kind of visual motifs that hopefully just bubble away under the surface but help kind of augment Chisato's performance.
Okay. And Chisato, you and your connection with the animation, what was the story behind those beautiful imageries that you used within the show?
Okay. In terms of the animation, that was actually it was actually Dave Packer's work, and he's incredibly experienced animator. But you will see that the sign language is there as a visual language, and so in my head, what I wanted was to create a fully impactful visual experience. And what I did was I actually sketched down some of my ideas, gave them to Dave, and then from there we worked together to develop our ideas through what I wanted and how he was able to go, okay, I can turn that into some animation. Sometimes there was more of a team discussion. For example, in terms of the effect of the exposure on the body, that's very difficult to kind of convey, directly. So what we had to do was think about how we could make that more abstract, by the use of children's drawings, for example, how we could, turn that into a cohesive art form. So there were lots of discussions about that in terms of the animation and the film and the photographic images, but it was all about how to create a really strong, impactful piece of work.
Anything more that's coming through on the Disability Arts Online Facebook page?
What was the most challenging aspect for Chisato and the team in using this technology and making it tour ready?
Great question. So what was the most challenging aspect of making this tour ready in terms of the digital art forms?
Oh well, are you asking me, or is that for...
Do you want to start? And then I'll start.
Sure.
You want to
Okay,
say
we'll
something
start
afterwards? You start.
So there is, I think there are a couple of challenges. There's a set of creative challenges and a set of logistical challenges. The creative challenge, I think, whenever you're using any kind of tech in performance, is to avoid it becoming spectacle. It has to kind of sit organically within this kind of experience that you're creating as a whole and feed into it and not overwhelm it. So that's a kind of creative challenge, I think, particularly if you're doing any kind of projection work, because the temptation is to chuck loads of stuff up and overwhelm the audience. That's why we're trying to kind of constantly edit and pare back, and as Chisato was saying, trying to use some fairly kind of naive imagery at times, just to make it very simple, very elegant is a kind of word I quite like to use when thinking about kind of light projection. So there's the creative challenges of that, and then there's also creative challenges in terms of shared languages. How do we talk about sound with a deaf performer? What's the shared language? How do we evolve a language together that allows us to talk, communicate, and share ideas when we're coming from very different kind of backgrounds? So that's a real kind of learning experience for me. So those are some of the creative challenges. In terms of the logistical challenges of touring, the other kind of big element to this is the soundscaping and also the vibration design as well. So I'll talk just briefly on behalf of Danny Bright, who's an incredible sound designer who also did the vibration design for this. And one thing I think that's worth saying initially about the vibration design is that it's not an effort to directly translate the hearing experience. It isn't just that when you hear a noise there's a vibration that matches it. There are moments where the two cross over, but there's also an effort to make two very distinct sensorial worlds. And nobody's getting the full picture at any one point. So if you're hearing, the soundtrack is not telling you everything. If you're deaf, the vibration is not telling you everything. And so on around the different senses that Chisato was talking about. So we use these vibration belts, these Woojer belts, to deliver a kind of bespoke vibration soundtrack, vibration design to the audience. One of the challenges of that, and we worked with an organisation in Canada called the
VibraFusionLab.
Thank you so much, the VibraFusionLab in Canada. And one of the challenges when you're working with vibration and your touring work is that the belts have a fairly narrow range of fidelity, so they can't hope to replicate full range, full frequency sound, which we're not trying to do. We're not trying to mimic sound through vibration. So we have to be aware of the kind of restrictions of the technology. So it does the low end, it does the bass, it does the kind of the stuff that you would feel in your chest anyway if it was pumping out of a sub speaker. So Danny talked in quite some length with Chisato about how we could use vibration within the restrictions of the technology to deliver a kind of bespoke vibration track. They are restricted in terms of the kind of frequency, so they deal with the kind of low end of sound. But within that, there's a fairly broad range of stuff that you can achieve in terms of kind of rhythm, tempo, and quality of vibration. So a nice example, I think, is that black rain image that you see at the end. So the black rain is a kind of ash falling back down as rain after the explosions. And that's a kind of really favourite bit of mine in terms of the kind of vibration work there, because it manages to be very delicate, very kind of subtle and almost beautiful compared to that kind of vibration that you get from the explosion. But to answer the question slightly more directly, in terms of preparing it for touring, there are real issues in terms of numbers of audience, for instance. You know, we are limited to 40 Woojer belts, limited to 40 audience members. It's a fairly substantial technical setup, so we need time, but you know, it's worth spending time on things that I think matter.
And just as producer, the Holo-Gauze is John made a projection thing, don't touch the Holo-Gauze. So I got a little bit concerned every time about it because it's really, really expensive and really delicate. But it was through introductions from here at Pervasive Media Studio that we met Holotronica. So Holo-Gauze is made in Bristol. But I got very, very precious about it, but we've got 2 lots now. So thanks to them very much for their support in allowing us to tour with this wonderful material. And again, obviously, the hair and all the cabling. So that's always a little bit of a headache. But for us, I think Chisato would say, but maybe she can say herself, the importance of having the blend of these things. We could quite easily show this work without the vibration, but it's part of the ethic and the aesthetic. It's really important to us, so wherever we can. But we do have different versions of the work. Maybe Chisato would like to explain.
Yes. Yes, yes. Good. Thank you for saying that. I'd just like to add, the challenge for me in terms of the process throughout the project, the most important thing for me has been that this is a deaf-led project, and it is seen and experienced through a deaf perspective. And so in terms of a visual balance, this was a priority in terms of how to balance the visual with the other sensory experiences as well. And in terms of our teamwork, it was really important that we learned how to communicate effectively and really gel as a team. I mean, in terms of the auditory aspect, obviously, it wasn't necessarily accessible to me, but Danny was absolutely brilliant, and he was able to explain things to me in a way that I was able to understand. And so in terms of the Woojer strap, the technology was limited, but, you know, in future, who knows where this can lead us? You know, the digital world is constantly evolving. So now, you've got an experience of sound into different channels. You've got through your ears and through your sense of touch and vibration. So it's really interesting. And what this means is, in terms of visual, auditory, sense of touch, bringing this all together in one coherent experience, it's really important to find a way to bring this together so that it works. In terms of the tour, it's been really, really wonderful to have Scored in Silence as a unique piece of work. I've never seen anything quite like this in any other theatres. I think this is new, and you know, we do need a lot of time to set things up and take care over it, but I think it has been absolutely worth it.
Thank you. There's a question from somebody at the back. Would you like to come forward?
Okay.
If that's all right.
I was wondering, the people that you interviewed originally, did they get to see the piece, and what did they think about it?
Great question. Thank you.
Okay, so just to clarify the question, you mean the did the people who I interviewed see the performance? Is that right?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very good question, because recently I went back to Japan and I showed the full film to Japanese deaf and hearing people who lived through the fallout of the bomb. They were quite tearful, emotional. They recognised it resonated with them. It was a really, really moving but incredibly bonding experience. And they also said, they started saying, actually I've got lots more stories, you know, so I mean that was wonderful. They wanted to see the live performance. They actually did, they told me that.
Thank you. Would you like to come up? No,
Sure.
great, thank you.
Does that matter?
Or your Woojer.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. As someone wearing the belt, I'm curious sort of about the role of silence in the piece, because especially when we talk about this being soundtracked as well as there being like an audio soundtrack. To me, when there were moments of silence that felt curated in the performance towards that moment, it was really impactful on the body and then quite emotional. And I just wondered, yeah, how you kind of designed where silence is and for what purpose.
So, what silence is, where it was, and for what purpose? Maybe Chisato to respond to that?
Wow, what a great question. Silence. So there is silence in terms of vibration and silence in terms of lack of sound. And in terms of our sensory experience, we can also experience silence as a tangible thing. And I think that that is very, very important. That's my view.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think as well, I think it goes back to that thing I was saying before about not overwhelming with stimuli. You know, as soon as you have a moment of one sense and a moment of another sense, and you leave a bit of a space between the two, then the kind of conversation opens up to open up a conversation about the relationship between the two. Why is there silence in terms of audio? Why is there silence in terms of vibration? I think it's just that idea about giving space to ideas, space for things to form in the audience's minds. So just that simple process of spacing things out and allowing these different senses to talk to each other, we kind of fill in the rest with these kind of large imaginative worlds that we carry with us.
And for me, always watching the film version, and this extract is part of the full-length film version, when I see the caption, silence, and all I hear, if people are connected to Woojers, is this vibration. It strikes me, and if you do get to see the full performance, that the deaf people, they didn't know what had happened to them. They only realised when the museum was created and they could connect to the images and the recounting of what had happened. So it's about the isolation they experienced, maybe about that silence and that vibration and the beauty of the mushroom crowd, which Chisato was talking about. So that's, I think, where the curation of the silences is to touch upon the different experiences as audience perceiving the work, but what may have been the experiences of those deaf hibakusha survivors of the able in all those years ago.
Yes, and just to add to that, this reminds me, when hearing people have talked to me, they talk about sound memory or auditory memory, you know, in terms of rehearing the sound of that explosion. There's nothing actually going on, but it's replaying in their head. So sound memory was a new thing to me, and it's maybe something like what I'm doing now, like tapping my hand. It's sort of like there's a trace of the memory of a sensory experience that I've been exposed to. So it seems that there's something underlying there in terms of, you know, different traces of sensory memory, and I think that this is all something that digital technology can play into and develop.
Any more questions from the room or online? Trish has another question from audiences watching online.
Would you describe your work as an act of healing?
So would you describe your work as an act of healing? Chisato.
What do you mean by healing? Sorry.
Do we think therapy, is it therapeutic, or getting over the knowledge of a traumatic experience that perhaps hasn't been recounted before?
I'll be honest with you. In terms of those people who survived that experience and told me their stories, personally I feel no. I don't know about the audience or other people, their experiences of it, but I think the importance of this piece was to just tell those stories and get those stories out there.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Sarah? Yeah.
I mean, obviously I have my own view, but it's not your view. And you've worked closely with those deaf hibakusha in telling the stories. The films that Chisato took when she went to Japan were so moving when we first saw them. For me, that their stories hadn't been told, and how important it is to acknowledge those untold stories. It's such a contribution, I think, this piece of work, in terms of documenting deaf perspectives, which is why we're here today. One more question, and then to the floor, and then from the room.
So someone says the graphics in the animation have a beautiful simplicity. How did you choreograph the sign line with the animation?
So to repeat the question, how did you choreograph the sign line with the animation, the beautiful simplicity?
Okay. In terms of BSL and sign miming, obviously they are very, very different. And now you've seen a little bit of that and hopefully are aware of the differences, because sign mime is a visual language in itself. For example, if I do this, and Chisato looks like she's holding a glass in her hand now. What I have now in my hand is a coffee cup in one hand and a glass of water. Now, they might look visually similar, but in terms of the animation, we have got either a glass full of water or a paper coffee cup. And so we have to think, well, when I'm doing this, which one am I holding? When I do this, which one am I drinking? Am I taking a sip? Am I taking a large gulp? That is how the mime helps to convey a message to the audience. So obviously, something like this needed the animation to kind of hook into it to provide something more coherent.
There's one piece in, one section in the full performance where Chisato has to grab an animated pot, but we've had lots of fun trying to grab that pot in the right position. We wanted to show, the reality of the three-dimensional performance. So Chisato is working with animation that she can't see that easily. So the sort of practice and attention to detail, working with John about where this pot and a myriad of other things that come through in the animation, it's a real art form. So we're always ecstatic when the pot is picked up in the right way, because it's really, really hard. I have nothing but admiration for being able to do that. A question on the floor. Would you like to come up? Please come. Yeah.
Thank you very much for showing us your work. My question is about really thinking about telling stories and the communication process, and how you sort of expose the gaps in the stories and in the communication, and how you think your work changes our perceptions of the Hiroshima bomb and the history. So how does it influence our perceptions of the bomb?
So how does your work, what you've achieved here, change everybody's perception of what happened at that time? Thank you.
Okay, so can I throw the question back to you? Has your perception been changed?
Yeah.
Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, yes, because
That's it.
There you go. You don't have to, but would you like to share what's shifted for you? What's changed?
well, it's the when we were talking about the silences, it's the missing parts of the story that we're able to sense, and so you're opening up these different sort of channels of communication. So we're feeling and hearing all the gaps that haven't been told, and that seems really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this whole thing for me is a visual score, and it's just telling a story and then pausing, telling a story, pausing, and so for me, the story runs all the way through, like, it's like music, but visual music.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Any other questions from the room or comments that people have? Anything more from the people, the Woojer wearing people? Yes. Would you like to come up? That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you for that. My question is around, because this is a very specific topic, and one event in history, it really intrigues me how all other historical experiences would be so vividly different for deaf people versus hearing people. Would you have any plans to develop the project and tell other stories with this technology?
Great question. So the telling of other stories with this blend of technology. Have you thought about that, Chisato? Any plans for the future?
Wait to see.
Wait and see. Watch this space.
John, anything to say in terms of this as a story? Because obviously you being involved and working with Chisato, what shifted for you as a lighting designer and an illusionist magician?
I think the thing that really chimed for me, and my big bit of learning from this, was what you were saying about it's the silence between things, and it's the absences that can mean as much as the presences. Sounds like a terrible sentence. But yeah, that it's it makes me think that it's we are all getting these incredibly fractured versions of the world. We're all filtering it through our own set of experiences and our own assumptions based on all this kind of confusing information, and we're just plotting as best we can our own narratives, our own stories through this sort of huge, overwhelming sets of experiences that go into a life. And it's important and valuable to remember that other people have a completely different way of filtering that, a completely different set of assumptions and decisions that they're making as a result of all these different sensory inputs. And this is just a really kind of, for me, a really concrete example of that, rooted in a pretty traumatic moment in history, that it's possible to have radically different experiences of an event.
I also think the deaf perspective on the use of digital tech. Digital created an explosion of access for deaf people, for my own family, elements of deafness there, and it changed everything. But deaf and digital for innovation, creating new worlds and experience, that feels to me really, really exciting. Really exciting. Any more questions from the floor or from online? Yes.
How could tech be used if the show was on a larger scale? Does it need to be the intimate experience? Because it was developed with the limitation of 40 devices, but if it was available, do you think it would still work in the same way?
So would the piece work if it was a larger scale piece, so it wasn't that intimate experience? What's the thinking around making it a bigger event for a larger audience? Would it change it?
John, you answer that question. Because you've got the experience, John, of sitting there and looking at the screen. So
yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think the first thing to say is that the vibration is absolutely sewn into this as an experience. So that cannot be taken out without lessening the live experience of the piece, and shouldn't be taken out because it is an integral piece of this thing that we've created. I mean, visuals are relatively. Do you want to say something?
also, just to add to that, yeah, you're right. But in terms of the Holo-Gauze and me standing there, and then the animation is laid on top, and the three things work together, and the audience has to be sitting in the right place, because if in a bigger auditorium, for example, their view would be distorted, or it's very important that the audience is sat in the right place in order for that to work. So, it depends on how far away they are, but, also, I mean, obviously, if there was some more funding, we could provide more Woojer straps and think about finding the right kind of space to incorporate a bigger audience.
Yeah.
Do you agree, John?
I do. I think there is a thing about intimacy that's important. I think when you're thinking about creating performances, you don't want to scale up just for the sake of size. The scale of it has to suit the context and the tone of the piece. And there are, this is kind of a contemporary version of, Victorian kind of stage illusions in a way. So there are sightline issues for sure. It relies on a fairly narrow sightline for this illusion to kind of work effectively.
And also to add, VibraFusionLab and David Bobier, who has been leading work with the vibrotactility. There are a lot of other devices, but currently they're too expensive for us to use. So this was something that we could easily access in terms of Woojer tech. But obviously there are handheld pillows and things that you could wear potentially moving forward for a sort of different vibrating experience. That technology has still to be developed and still to be cost effective for us to use. Just to also say, Chisato wears vibration devices within the costume when she performs, so she's experiencing the same vibration as the audience is experiencing, but that helps her with cues to know where she is in the piece, but also creates a relationship dynamic between herself and the audience. I often feel as her producer that she's quite isolated, so it's kind of quite friendly for her to be feeling the same thing, but obviously useful to know where she is and where the audience are in the piece.
Just had a great one coming on Facebook. Would you describe this as a Japanese work of art? What elements of it reflect and honour Japanese culture of the time, then and now?
So is this a Japanese piece of artwork? Does it value historically Japanese art forms and Japan today?
Do you mean links to a particular Japanese artist, do you mean, or?
Do you see this as Japanese art? So is it a Japanese art form?
Yes, in terms of the story and the performance, yes, it is Japanese, yes. However, in terms of British artists, I feel that there is also a natural affiliation with that as well.
time for maybe one more question? Maybe from the room? Or maybe one more online?
Sorry, I'm looking.
So, done with the question. Anyone in the room? One more. Any of Woojer, some feedback on, you know, good and maybe not so good in terms of the experience?
I liked it.
Would you like to come up? Just thank you. Thank you. This will be our last. No pressure. Oh,
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was really interesting. I've never experienced theatre kind of film performance with vibration. I'm a fan of big heavy bass music.
Oh yeah.
So I'm familiar with it in that way, in augmenting that experience. But I really liked how it didn't match the sound that we heard. I felt that was really interesting.
It didn't match.
Yeah.
No, it's a separate score.
Yes.
Yeah, which felt very special, something I hadn't experienced before. My question was, when can we see this? Are you in Bristol? What is the plan for the tour?
Well, fingers crossed. I will be back in Bristol. I will be invited to Bristol for performance. So yes, fingers crossed. I mean, I feel Bristol is the perfect place. Just so you're streets ahead in terms of digital technology and innovation. I have a question. When you were listening to the sound and you had the vibration as well, how could you say a little bit more about how they kind of complemented each other? Because you said they were separate, but I'm interested to know how they kind of complemented each other.
So I would say that the idea of kind of, I felt quite a lot of tension building, I suppose, in the segment that we saw, and which really brought me into my body in terms of that anticipation of what I was going to experience. So I was kind of feeling that as I would watching a film or performance, but actually it made me very conscious of the fact that there was another element. Kind of, it brought me back into my body. It made me feel more grounded in the experience rather than just kind of observing. Zara.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a point at which the sound is there. I think it's like the plane's taken off, and then there's a really good interplay between the sound of the plane taking off, the vibration of the bell, sort of as you almost feel the ground leave, and then there's a point towards, I feel like maybe there's like a red dot on the screen. So then there's the pull up that's done in the performance, and then there's a red dot, and all of that creates almost a sensation of taking off actually. And it feels, for me in a way, the only thing that I could say that's potentially, I felt a little bit uncertain experiencing it also as a hearing person, was that I did feel a certain privilege of the totality of that experience, of sound, and it was the moments when it cut away from neither that were actually most powerful for me in terms of feeling really a part of this experience. There were times when I could feel people turning towards me because my vibration, my belt had gone really quite intense, but there was no sound. And those moments made me feel slightly outside of the experience. So silence for me was something I was really interested in, how that could be more explicitly play into a communal experience. There were times when the silence, the noise of the vibration created an extra layer that made me feel slightly disassociated.
Good, thank you.
Such a great response, but also to talk about equity, equitability in the piece and access. We're going to have to finish now. Obviously, if you go to Disability Arts Online, the Facebook page, there's discussion rife there. Just like to thank you so much for coming to the lunchtime talk, and Pervasive Media Studio and Watershed for always making us feel so welcome. This film of the live stream will be available online, I think, in a few days. Thank you very much, and we'll keep you connected with the tour as it develops. It will be here in the UK and globally as well. So thank you so much and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.